afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me? Is it good? Sound good? Excellent. So, has anyone heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh? Anyone put the hand up and say, I've heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh? One lady here. So, for those of you who don't know what it is, it's the oldest story known to man. And it was written in 1200 BC. The reason I'm telling you about this is because storytelling goes way, way back. It's something that's deep in our psyches, deep in our culture. And the story of Gilgamesh is basically about a man called Gilgamesh who loses his best friend. And he goes on this epic journey to go and find his best friend. Now, the story itself is based loosely on facts, but it's a little bit like one of those Hollywood blockbuster movies. They've given it some artistic license, and it's not exactly completely true. But what it does is it demonstrates and it tells you about a struggle and a journey. And so this particular story has got a reason for actually sharing it with. It's about a story, a struggle with other people. So today I'm going to talk to you about the art of storytelling. Now, it's not going to be a technical talk about storytelling. I'm going to give you a few examples. It's going to be really practical for you because you are going to go away, and I'm really hot on objectives. I have the anorak of objectives. So you will go away with at least 7 uses for stories. So if you've never used stories in your training, you'll go away with at least 7 uses. You'll also create your own story using a very simple template. Sometimes, I don't know whether you've ever got caught in a lift with somebody and you turn around and you think, if only I'd structured my story a little bit better. Well, you're going to get a structure for a story that you're going to be able to take away, and it's a very, very simple one. So is there anybody here that actually uses stories in their training? Fantastic, I love that. So tell me, what are some of the uses that you put stories to?
Real life experiences.
So real life experiences, what else?
I use it as a warm-up for people to tell some of their work experience.
So as a warm-up for them to talk about their work experience. Any other people? Steve? Metaphors. So yes, sometimes metaphors are a way of actually putting across something which might be a bit tricky. So use a metaphor. Anybody else put their hand up?
We use stories for sharing values.
Sharing values, great use. Nikki?
Making dry facts a bit more compelling and interesting.
Making dry facts a little bit more compelling and interesting. Anybody else got any uses? Translating theory into the real world. Fantastic. So some great uses already. I've used stories for lots and lots of different things, and I love stories. One of the things I absolutely love about stories is if you say to somebody in a classroom setting, you say, I'm going to tell you a story. Are you all sitting comfortably? Everyone does what you're just doing now, which is smiling at me. And they smile and they all listen. And I remember years ago using, for a team building event, the story of the enormous turnip. Has anyone come across that story? The enormous turnip. And it was fantastic. So instead of the normal energizer after lunch, I thought, well, do you know what? They're a little bit, sleepy anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, are you sitting comfortably? I'm going to tell you a story about the enormous turnip. And then what I did was we started to ask questions, right? Well, who would you be in that story? If you could take one person out of the story, would the story remain the same? And asking questions. And the answers were fantastic. Considering that slot after lunch you think of as being as a graveyard slot and not much thinking goes on, the thought that went on was fantastic. So it's convinced me that stories are a great thing to use, even in that graveyard session that we call. Some people said to me, well, I'm the mouse, because actually in my team I think of myself as being really insignificant, but actually I know I actually have a real purpose. Even though it's a small one and people don't see me that much, I'm the mouse. Some people said, oh, I'm the grandmother, because I tend to rally people round and look after them and everything, and people identify with stories. We know what stories are. We know they've got a beginning, a middle and an end. We know what they're like. So when you say to somebody, let me tell you a story, they know what to expect, and so it's something that's very deep. So we've got quite a number of different uses, but I've put some uses on this flip chart, which I'm just going to briefly talk through because you've given me some great examples as well. So, introducing a new topic. If you want to introduce and illustrate a new topic, stories are a great way of doing that. And that could be a real life story. It could be something that's happened to a customer. Sometimes I make up stuff, not lying, but make up stuff, because what I want to do is convey the emotions that somebody might be going through in a situation, and I tell a story around that so that people begin to empathize with that character. It might be to start a discussion. So like the team building event, who are you in the team? You know, who are you? What's your purpose in the team? To start a discussion. Developing empathy for others. If we talk about the 5 solid principles of customer service and why we should do them, I think that has far less impact. And if we talk about Doris, who's 75, and she's had a terrible experience going into this shop, buying this pair of trousers or whatever, we tend to empathise a lot more if they're characters rather than if it's like 5 solid principles or whatever. Sometimes changing minds and ways of thinking without saying you need to think differently, we can tell a story to illustrate how one way of thinking might be better than another way of thinking. Making a boring topic come to life as well, and highlighting its importance. Now, I try never to say to people, this is boring, but we're going to have to get through it, because that sets you up for, actually people are going to be bored probably. So I always tell people this is really important and you need to pay attention. And I might say, well, I'm going to use a story to illustrate how this works. And at the same time, you'll be developing empathy for people as well, because you'll be building characters as well. Now, for those people who are very visual, stories are fantastic, because they almost play through the scenes in their mind. For those people who are quite auditory, because you're listening intently to words, it appeals to them. And for those people who are quite kinesthetic, because you talk about emotions as well in stories, or get emotions in, they appeal to those sorts of people as well. So stories appeal to everyone. We all know the background, so why don't we use them more? Probably because we think they're for children, but actually stories are fantastic. They might be for sharing organisational or personal stories to illustrate something. And you were saying about sharing something that's happening within the organisation to actually, make it come to life and to illustrate something good that's happening. So if you want change to happen within your organisation, you need to start telling those stories about what's changing now. What's the result of that change? What's happened? What's the result of it? How has it made people feel? You need to spread those stories around. Steve, you mentioned as a metaphor for a difficult subject. Now, some of the latest neuroscience has said that sometimes that when we talk about a really difficult subject, let's imagine that we've got a very difficult manager, we're trying to explain a situation to somebody else. And when we do that, when we relive those emotions, it's almost like being back in that situation. It's not always good for us, because what we're doing is just reliving it again. Our bodies are sort of going, we're going through that same stress again. This isn't comfortable. Metaphor is a great way to avoid that same stress again. So line managers encouraging their staff to speak more in metaphor, saying things like, do you know what, the way he treated me was a real kick in the stomach. And this is how it was. This is what sort of a kick in the stomach it was. Metaphors are a great way of just distancing yourself a little bit from maybe some difficult emotions. Help in identifying with a situation and relating it to your own as well. So illustrating something with a story and then getting people to say, well, how does that differ, or how's that similar to your situation? What's different? I've used stories as a way of creating something a bit more interesting out of a dry topic as well. And for instance, there was I was working with some trainers and we were talking about barriers to learning. And so I thought, well, how are we going to do this? So I made up a story about two characters. One guy was called Quasimodo and the other one was called Esmeralda. And again, some of you are smiling around here because you know who Quasimodo and Esmeralda are. But the Hunchback wasn't part of the story. It was just a way of engaging people. So I told the story about Quasimodo and some of the barriers that he had to learning within the organisation, some of them that stemmed from individuals and so I just used it as a way of illustrating, but injecting a bit of humour into it as well. Have I missed anything off? Oh, closing off a topic as well. If you want to end the day on a nice point and get people to have that last parting thought, what do you want them to go away with? What do you want them to be thinking about on the bus, on the way home, or in the car? What's that last thought? Stories are a great way of really getting into people's heads about that particular point. So use a story to close off a point as well. Any more uses you can think of, because we've gone through quite a lot, more than 7, isn't it? Any other uses you can think of?
Case studies?
Case studies, absolutely, are stories as well. So case studies are generally stories from real situations. Good idea to take people's names out of, just a hint though. Good idea, so people don't recognise. And don't just call like Jack, James or whatever. Try and change the names completely. Any other ideas about what you can use stories for? Okay, so we've got quite a few uses there already, at least 7. So that's the first part of my promise to you today. The next bit is about how do you learn to tell good stories? So what sort of format do they take? So this is the structure of a story. There are 6 parts to it. It's not my own structure. I've taken it from a really, really fantastic trainer called Larry Reynolds, who lives in North Yorkshire, not very far away from where I live. And this is a fabulous framework for actually telling stories. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all tell a story of my own using this framework, and you're going to be able to spot, I'm going to be looking at each of the points, so you'll know when I get to the next point. And then you're going to have a chance to play, and then you're going to tell me what that was like. All right? So I'm going to tell you a story about something that happened to me earlier this year. It was back in May. Now, I'm not what I would consider necessarily the brave entrepreneurial type necessarily. I do a lot of brave things even when I'm scared, but I'm not necessarily a great brave entrepreneurial chap. So I decided that I was going to do the CIPD exhibition at Olympia, which was a big thing for me. It's a big investment and it was a really, really big thing. So the way I felt about it was absolutely petrified about it. Now, the way that I work, I do a lot of training of trainers, and I love working with trainers. I've got a product called the Learning Loop, which I was taking to Olympia for the first time to a bigger audience, much bigger audience than I'd have ever exposed it to before. My biggest fear in life, I suppose, and I know you're probably going to laugh at this, is looking silly. That's my biggest fear. And so one of my things was I was going to look silly and perhaps unprofessional as well, so 2 things. So that's how I felt about it. Moving on to number 3 now, where did I get the help from? I get an awful lot of fantastic feedback from Sharon of Pearl Catchers, from people at Pearl Catchers. Steve, I've known for a number of years. Lots of people whose opinions that I respect, that give me great feedback and say, Chris, what you're doing is great. And so that for me was a real booster My husband is a fantastic support as well. He's on the other side of the stand over there, and he's a great help and a great encourager as well. And you need people, when you are feeling scared to do something, you need people who are going to say to you, you'll be great, you will be fantastic. And so I had people who were saying that to me. Now, come the morning of the event, bearing in mind the night before I'd been setting up my stand, and my stand, part of it is just round the corner. Quite colourful, very, very different from everybody else's. So I'm looking around at everybody else's stands, thinking I'm very different. Is that good? No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. It's fantastic. No, it isn't. By the morning, I'd worked myself into such a lather I couldn't even manage breakfast. And that is quite unusual for me. I normally can manage my breakfast really, really well. So come the morning, I'm really, really nervous, and the doors opened. I think it was about 9:30. People came in. We were mobbed for 2 days, absolutely mobbed for 2 days. It was fantastic. I had great conversations with people. People got to hear what I absolutely love doing, which is training trainers, and about the Learning Loop, which is something I'm passionate about. It was fantastic to have those conversations. What I learned about myself was that I am quite brave, but I do stuff anyway. But the thing that I've got to do is pay more attention to those people who keep telling me what I'm good at and keep giving me that feedback and that encouragement, and really taking it on board, so that when I'm faced with events that scare me, it sort of goes, but actually it will be fine. I believe them then. So that's my story, and I've used that structure, okay? So this is an interactive bit now, so I need you to find a partner. So very, very quickly, if you can find yourself a partner to work with just now. Put your hand up if you don't have a partner, and we'll find somebody for you to work with. Hand up if you don't have a partner. So everybody's got a partner who wants to take part. Brilliant. So what I would like you to do is 5 minutes each way, you are going to tell a story using that story structure to your partner. So 5 minutes one way, I'll tell you when the 5 minutes is over, and then 5 minutes the other way, all right? You can be glancing over at it, obviously, but use that structure, and then I want to get some feedback from you about how that actually felt, having that structure, how the story felt for your listeners as well. What was it like? Did you get the point? Did you get everything that was meant to come over? Okay, so 5 minutes, starting from now. Decide who's going to go first using that structure. Okay, if you want to swap over now, and the other person gets a chance to tell their story for 5 minutes, okay? Right. Okay, everybody, so I'd love to hear from anybody who was listening to a story what that felt like for you. So anybody who's listened, which has been all of you, what was it like listening to the story using that structure? Tell me some words. It was interesting. Works.
Very easy to relate.
Energizing. Empowering.
Very easy to construct the images and relate.
Very easy to construct the images. Connection. Absorbing. Why don't we use stories more? This is fantastic, isn't it? All these great words that we're using. What else was it like listening to the story? Engaging. Anything else? Sounds pretty good to me. You felt the story move on. Yeah, because there's a structure behind it. Yeah, so you felt the story move on. Great stuff. What about when you were telling the story? What did that feel like then to you, having that structure?
It made it easier to tell the story because you've got
it was easier to tell the story because you've got bits there that you know you're moving on, yeah? Brilliant. What else? You found it difficult to tell a story about yourself. Okay. How about that structure for something else though, if it was for a different subject other than yourself?
It's probably easier to talk about yourself. You feel a bit uncomfortable talking about myself.
Right, okay.
Like tension.
Yeah.
That's something else.
Okay. It can be difficult, can be uncomfortable talking about yourself because actually you're sort of making yourself vulnerable to people as well, aren't you? So I appreciate that. Anything else?
Well, I could talk about myself for hours, so that's the issue. But I thought that I would never have thought to have included that.
So,
That made it helped me.
yeah. So point 3, what unexpected help came your way? That sort of comes from sort of like the hero heroine type thing, because in all the stories that we know about, really, we usually have some sort of help from somewhere, don't we? A hero or heroine. Somebody comes along, don't they? So that's a really interesting point. Yeah, sometimes identifying who is your hero and heroine, actually identifying them. Anything else? Telling the story that felt good or different or whatever. So you've had an experience of telling a story, listening to a story. Hopefully you've also got a list of all the different uses. If anyone wants to take pictures of the flip charts, please feel free to do so. Storytelling is just one of the tools that I use when I'm actually training trainers or when I'm delivering training in any form. And it's a powerful way of doing it, but it's not the only tool in my toolkit. If you want to find out more about the sorts of things that I do, I'm just around the corner, the Learning Loop. If you want to find out how you can get loopy, come and get a sticker as well. I'm loopy, are you? And it's been fantastic speaking to you. I must mention, because I get told off when I don't mention these things, I've got an open workshop coming up 12th and 13th of October in Leeds. Also 29th of February, 1st of March, I've got an open workshop as well. And I do run some free events as well. So if you want to find out more, leave your details with us, leave your card or whatever, and we'll get back to you. But thank you very much for all your participation. Thank you.